Heyo, welcome to the Industry Idiots podcast. Hi, Sven.
Hello, how you doing? New episode.
Yes, and today with us is published author and magically impressive narrative designer behind beloved games like Drakensang, national chairperson of the Association of German Authors, and overall badass Lena Falkenhagen. Welcome.
Thank you. I think that's me. Thank you for that introduction. And hi, Sven.
Hi, glad to have you here. Very ecstatic.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Honestly, it was pretty hard to write the title because there were so many more things that I could have put in there. Crazy.
Not all of them are really important for every situation or every occasion. We're talking about games focused today mainly, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of narrative design talk, I assume, and maybe passion projects or what we like to play in our free time. What do you think I might have missed, and you wanna say or tell us about yourself?
About me?
Yeah,
I think people might be interested in the dark eye past a bit, das schwarze Auge, the World Aventuria, which I sat on the design board for I think 17 years. Because usually, like that changed in my age. I start to meet people in CEO positions that actually have played the Dark Eye, which is kind of funny. And I think that very young people might not even know what that is, the Dark Eye.
Well, we play weekly.
Ah, nice, very nice. I saw the password for the server here was the Dark Eye thing.
A little reference, yeah.
Some Grüße, yeah. It's like a greeting that you say to the gods, right?
Inside. I love that. Yeah. It's an Aventurian thing. I love that. And the other thing is that I'm a novelist, so I do write on paper, or it's printed and published on paper. I do write digitally, of course, but I come from writing novels, and I moved into games later on. So I've done several things, and I'm writing audiobooks at the moment for Audible Originals, which is kind of fun. So I try to cover all the formats and mediums, which is funny.
This is quite the multifaceted portfolio you have there. So it's the most interesting thing about it, I think, is that you probably have to take a different writing approach for all of these different types of media. So would you be able to say right off the bat what would be the biggest difference from writing something like that's specifically related to games itself when you separate it from the other media? Like writing a novel is, I guess, totally different from writing content for games as well. So.
Yeah, it's like from the get-go, it's not so different, actually. It becomes different in the process. And of course, you have to take interactability into account. So player agency and parallel storytelling and the likes, or branching storylines. And of course, depending on the game, actually, you might not plan for a very chronological story. With Drakensang Online, we did actually. So Drakensang Online does not have choices that you can actually do, despite from do I enter that map or don't I? So you don't have you cannot choose how to finish a quest. You can only choose to finish or to not finish the quest. So that's the only choice that Drakensang Online gives you. But for example, Love Stories that I wrote for Carlsen Verlag does have parallel storylines and branching storylines. And that was still kind of chronological, actually. So it was a kind of an embedded storyline, or the purpose was the storyline. And if I have yet to plan an open game world, for example. I haven't done that yet, which is a totally different approach, because you plan for what's happening in the map and not what story am I offering the player. And you do plan that differently, of course. And if you do it like, I'm always talking about The Witcher when I talk about games because I love it so much. I'm sorry about that.
Great choice.
No, that's fine. That's how we met when we were in our talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I adore that game so much because it's so well structured on all the different story levels. So you have one story arc, the meta story arc, I usually call it, where you have very little influence by the player, but it's very impactful, and the lower you get, so there are several layers, and down below you have the open game world, where you can make every choice and yourself, and go where you want, and choose and pick what you do. And it's not that meaningful. So that's what I learned at the Dark Eye, especially, that the more choice you give the player, the less meaningful it usually is. And The Witcher kind of proved that to me.
I wrote a blog post on responsive narrative the other day, and I'm kind of working on, like, in my future career, to push the boundaries of, responsive narratives and just open world narrative design. And what I'm like, how much I love Witcher as well, and we're both super fans. But what I'm still missing in all of these games, including Witcher, is that whatever you do in the game world affects you narratively. If let's say Geralt's second name, the Butcher of Bravik or whatever.
Blaviken. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, that one, exactly. Mm-hmm. Let's just pretend he didn't have that, and instead you were in the game world and you slaughtered half the population of Novigrad. Mm-hmm. And then you would dynamically gain a title like the Butcher of Novigrad. And then people react to you accordingly, and maybe they recognize you from your clothing or from your style. Something similar has already been implemented in Kingdom Come Deliverance. And I just wish that these kind of systems would be in most or almost all the open world narrative heavy games.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting point, because you're actually in Witcher, from what I feel, you're playing Geralt's story and not your own story. You're not creating a custom character. So it wouldn't make sense if you would earn that title if it's not in the predefined story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you kind of do. You kind of do that. So in Steam and in GOG, you do have achievements, for example, that do exactly that, but they do it not in the game world. They do it on the shelf, and that's what keeps us from. It's a bit detached, I think. So it doesn't really influence your character or how you view your character, because it's something artificial that's on the top layer of the UI, basically. And inserting that in the game would be highly interesting. I'm not sure if there's not maybe a game out there that does that. I'm sure you will have lots of comments with stuff, maybe, if that happens. And we just don't know about it because there are so many games out there.
Yeah, but Kingdom Come Deliverance is pretty close.
I think, though, that The Witcher did a very good job in something quite similar, because I love that you can just ride through a village and you hear people talking about stuff, and suddenly you pick stuff up and you just realize that they give you hints about a quest, and you can go closer and listen in, and you find more hints and more clues, and then you can go and find out what this is all about. So this really feels very interactive to me, because it draws you in instead of pushing a quest onto you. So it's you can choose to let it go, or you can choose to do it, actually. So I find that highly enticing.
That would actually be my exact counter argument to Sven, that he said that, you're playing the story of Geralt, so you shouldn't be able to have these kind of responsive influence on the story. But then why can I even choose to not do things, right, if I'm playing Geralt's story? Because it is still about player agency and players being able to do whatever they want and immersion. It's still, you're playing Geralt, but you can influence his decisions. So I should be able to gain titles and change Geralt's storyline for my interest as well.
Sven, are there many games that so other examples out there where you can basically write your own story and not like a fictitious character's story? I mean, despite Candy Crush, where you don't have an avatar, a character that you're playing.
Skyrim comes to mind first.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been also the pick I would have been going for. Skyrim is probably the closest one, even though it, of course, has written and predefined quest lines that have mostly the same outcome, no matter what you choose during the game, except if you try or decide to slay the NPC, then the quest is gone, of course. Mm-hmm. But for some of the cities or towns you meet in the game, and then you've done some remarkable quests, slaying a dragon or something like that, then the people actually sometimes react to you, according to that, and kill you, greet you with, you're the Dragonborn, and stuff like that. So this is something that's super cool in the form of responsive narrative. If that would be even more implemented to a higher degree in more other games, then that would be even more immersive, I think. Like the world even more reacting to your choices in the game.
Okay, so I do need to play that one. I thought I didn't need to, because Skyrim was in a phase where I tried not to play so many video games, and I kind of took a step back to focus. I don't know, I think it was writing a novel or something like that. I don't really remember, but it was something, and I just thought, okay, I'm letting that one go. But
Skyrim is really worth it for its world building. I think that's the bottom line that everyone can agree with.
Yeah, discovering the world.
You know, you can explore, and you have all these side quests to discover and all that stuff. Of course, what Sven mentioned with the like, oh, you're the Dragonborn. That's, you know, that's fake reactive or responsive narrative, because that's still heavily written into the story, and it's not, you didn't do an independent emergent action that triggered the game world to, you know, recognize you as the Dragonborn, but it's part of the story. An amazing game, and I think we can both encourage or tell you to, this is worth trying out.
I'll put it on my pile of shame.
Yeah. So the one thing for Skyrim is, because it's such an enormous game, and you have so much to do, you get so easily sidetracked. And if you don't like condition yourself to follow through with a specific quest, you get so easily sidetracked, and then some of the quests lose so much momentum, especially the main story. If you don't play the main story from beginning to end and don't get sidetracked, I think the pacing of it really falls flat in some regions. So I always recommend to anybody who plays the game to follow through with the quest lines for the specific guilds and the specific towns. If that's your playstyle, I know that a lot of people just like to get lost in this world. So that's also totally valid. But for me personally, I like to experience the story in a paced way, how the designer wants to pace it.
Yeah, but that's kind of hard, actually. I was, again, like contrasting this with The Witcher. So obviously it's not good for pacing matters if you do not hold the quest. So if you offer too many quests, actually. And in The Witcher, I felt that the only thing story-wise that didn't really work out for me was that some quests of the main quest line had some sense of urgency and emergency, even. So if you try to find allies against the attack on Kaer Morhen, for example, and you, I don't know, do a romantic stint with Akira Metz in the woods, it kind of loses momentum too. So I think, apart from just having a timer tick down in the background and losing the quest if you don't react quickly, so putting pressure on the player, I don't have a solution for that, actually. It's hard, but it's the truth.
I think it's like an unspoken agreement that the designers have with the players, right? Because let's just be honest, 95% of the players wouldn't enjoy if they can't, you know, complete the entire world and just put quests on the sideline and the back burner for a while.
Absolutely. It's totally valid to just go for the main quest line, though in The Witcher, for example, again, I kind of bloodied my nose doing that. I usually go for the main quest line and try to do that. And I got my ass handed to me in the process. And so I had to go to the open game world. And I had fun doing that. And I appreciated it a lot. But at some points, it loses momentum, like you said. So.
Oh yeah, The Witcher especially does it with like certain quest regions and hub regions as well, to keep you away from certain areas because there's a level gap. It's probably what you meant as well, that you can't go to Skellige, for example, when you are below level 15, and every monster would probably hand it to you. So that's kind of it. Of course, is heavily designed that the designers account for it, that you do all the side quests that are required to level up for that region. So I'm thinking that if you would be able to access these regions earlier, it would provide the player with much more freedom in one sense. But at the same time, I don't know how frustrating that could be if you are constantly getting beaten by these monsters. But on the other side, if you overcome that challenge, then you feel super heroic and super powerful if you are beating monsters that are above your level. So it could empower the player to a certain amount.
Yeah, absolutely. It started way earlier for me than Skellige, so it was in the dungeon, in the Elven dungeon, which is quite early. I think it's level. I entered with level 5, and it was level 7 or something like that. So, and yeah.
Before we get hate mail, yes, I am, and now we are aware that in the options of Witcher there exists a setting where you can enable dynamically leveling enemies, so you can level in all areas and do all the quests in your.
Oh, I never knew.
Yeah. I never knew.
Now the information is out there for everyone to use. Yeah, I play with it on because both have their negative points, right? The one, if you have the leveling not turned on, right? If it's like the default where you have to progress, you can over level.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it makes your choices smaller, right? And you can over level areas, and then things feel, like you shouldn't be that strong yet. But you did 20, 40,000 side quests, and now you're too strong for every boss. The other side of the thing is that the negative part of the other mode, where everything is dynamically leveling, is that it loses meaning, and it's becoming more and more meaningless. And also, why are rats my level? Like a common rat from level 1, why is this level 24 now?
Yeah, that, and so you lose kind of a world building mechanism, and you lose, and for me that's even worse. You lose a design factor. So the designers had a purpose in steering player movement with handing out the quests in a specific order and in a specific level. And I think so. I myself, I do trust level and game designers, and I want that experience, and I want to see how good it is. And in The Witcher, it's excellent, and it's and you will hit barriers, you will hit walls. Of course you do, but in this game, it never felt artificial to me. It always has a reason. For example, you couldn't find a boat to Skellige, and that's enough explanation for me. So if it has an in-game explanation, I'm totally cool with it. And so I feel I want the experience that a designer has designed for me, and that's important.
Witcher, I also never installed mods. Unlike Skyrim, right, where you install hundreds of mods and you never think about it twice, and you're a little bit like your own developer. You're making this RPG to fit yourself, right? But in Witcher, I never installed mods until the day I saw a Reddit post of an ex-lead combat designer or some like higher up in the design team from CDPR who was working Witcher 3. And he made his own mods for the game and said, this was my intended experience for the combat, that I couldn't get into the game because it was too difficult and too realistic. And of course, this was the first mod I installed, and I played the entire game with it.
Nice. That's one mod I would never install. Actually, I did. And yes, I'm shallow sometimes. I installed the HD art mod that kind of updated the artworks, the graphics to modern standards, yeah, thank you. And it's quite beautiful again. So it was just tiny changes, but they're so worth it.
What was we're talking so much about Witcher, so might as well do a little bit more of that. What's something that you really loved about Witcher? What made it such, this game obviously has an impact on all of our lives, and why does it have such a hard impact on your life, Lena?
Because it doesn't pull any punches. Like narrative-wise, it goes all the way. It just so they made the lead story designer king of the game, and it paid off, and that makes me kind of happy. And that this is not to prove a point. It's just to say that, I mean, Witcher is a very special game to me because it's based on a literary basis. It's this book series that I like very much. And it, of course, the feeling is changed between like books and games. There's obviously a difference, but they respect the spirit of the books and the storylines. And it takes over, so it keeps the depth of the world. And I find that, for example, Cyberpunk 2077 is also based on an RPG series with a lot of world building, and I'm so much looking forward to that because I feel, I mean, everybody does. There are people out there who say that the CDPR, even CDPR, couldn't meet the standards and the expectations anymore after so many delays and so much expectation. But to me, it was just, it had so many layers of storytelling, and there, like, I think I found one tiny place or one tiny dialogue that didn't really match the previous one, which is insane in a game of that size. And then again, there was one other thing. So I'm sorry, I'm piling this onto you. Like in the finale, and I hope I can do spoilers here. I mean, it's 5 years old now, and everybody's played it, right? In the finale, Ciri says to Geralt, "This is not your story; it's my story." And she takes absolute control of the story, and that teared me up so much. It was just so meaningful, and it was the highest level of the story, where you can do only so tiny changes, and all these changes are just like influencing a girl's emotional state. And that this is basically the most important story arc of the whole game, just on a character level, that kind of made me gleeful.
And no backtracking, so everything you do in that part of the story is final, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You do really influence the outcome, and that's so meaningful.
Yeah, there are like, I think, 7 or 8 major choices in certain quest lines where you have to react in one way or another, and that influences the ending. And for me, as the impact is probably much higher if you don't see it coming, that you can influence it as much. But on the other side, I would like to know if that certain decision is so impactful, because like 90% of the game is not as impactful on the ending itself. Mm-hmm. But like these 7 or 8 key decisions are not presented as these key decisions to the player. So in a way, I feel like, okay, if I would have known that, then maybe I would have reacted differently to get a different outcome.
But that's how stories should be, right? Game stories should be like really just going with the flow and reacting in a very guttural manner, and then something changes. You know, that's it. Really feels very deep to me. And I went there. I had the exact same feeling like you did, Sven. And I went out there into the wild internet, and I tried to look up the decisions that you do to influence Ciri's outcome, Ciri's fate. And I tried to change my decision, and I couldn't, because it felt so wrong.
Yeah, I feel that.
It's really, it really taught me a lesson on how much choice do I even have in a computer game, because I would always go through the same decision again and again and again if I had the choice. So, I mean, yes, I think it's important to give those choices, but it's because you have different player personality types, right? So somebody else might always take the other path, or I don't know, wing it and choose by a coin toss or something like that. But yeah, I don't know how much choice in a game do we even have in our personality.
Or need.
And that's also how life is, right? You don't know when you're doing a meaningful. Okay, sometimes when you decide to which university you go, yes, you know that it's a meaningful decision, and you're aware of it being a meaningful decision. But sometimes you also just, take a day trip somewhere, and then you win the lottery or whatever, and you didn't know that you're going to make a meaningful or a crazy outcome decision this day. And I think this is how the game has presented its decisions as well. Some decisions you were aware that this is a very impactful one, like the final moments with one of the relationships. You knew that this is important, what I choose here.
Absolutely.
But some of the lesser known ones, you couldn't, because that's how life is. You can't predict which is meaningful and which isn't.
True.
And you just described the nature of every gaming conference, or every, you don't know if something will happen, but if you don't go, you know that nothing will happen. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Networking.
Maybe this is, with this question, we're moving a little bit away from Witcher. Maybe this is too soon, but I still wanted to ask, just for myself as well. Given that you're in the German Authors Association, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about narrative design and standards in the narrative design game world and everything, and what is there still to be done internationally as well for the developers?
That's a very, very complicated question.
We often engage in discussion. We have a narrative design Discord where we often talk about with other professionals, and we often talk about should there be unionization and should all these. I don't want to make this political. Just asking where is there still work to be done, and what for you is the most important part?
There's so much work to be done in the video gaming industry. So the German Writers Association that I chair, der Schriftsteller, Verband Deutscher Schriftstellerinnen und Schriftsteller, is organized in Verdi, which is one of the service unions in Germany. So we are an association or a professional association, but we are organized in Verdi. And I appreciate that a lot because you have so much experience in the work field through Verdi and a lot of pros who just know how to deal with situations. And I can only encourage people to join and to join the Verband Deutscher Schriftstellerinnen und Schriftsteller. Because I want to build up a gaming narrative work circle to do exactly that, to look at the field and see what can we do for people who write narrative for games, and to discuss where to basically steer this, because the VS is so it started off as a authors union basically, or authors association, and we are taking up, I don't know, poetry slammers, for example, or games narrative writer, or blog writers sometimes can join. And I think that's a good thing, because this is not only about books, it's about people who write professionally, and that is not only the book industry anymore. We have, for example, movie script writers and so many different fields. And if we can offer, gain some expertise in this field and offer help for these people, I think that would be quite awesome. I mean, a nice start would be if it would be natural in different gaming companies to just have working councils, like Betriebsräte, which doesn't need to be a bad thing. Some people have it. Like, I think Big Point is still the only gaming company that actually has a legitimate Betriebsrat, a workers' council.
Is the workers' council a thing outside of Germany?
I don't know, actually. I don't really know. But as soon as the company is has a physical working place in Germany, you can build up a Betriebsrat if you have a certain amount of workers. I think it's 15, but I'm not quite sure. And given the standards and the crunch and all the different, like the payment levels and the lack of management potential or management trainings in the industry, I think that would actually be a good thing to have that. But some companies, I don't know, they try to stop that with every means, legal and not so legal.
Yeah.
But I think it's a bad thing, because happy workers make for good games, and a workers' council does help with that.
I know that unionization outside of Germany is way more extreme or aggressive. Generally, unions in Germany aren't seen as so negative as unions are often seen in America for their... Do they operate differently, maybe? I don't know why they're so much more aggressive than here in Germany. But yeah, generally good wages and good hours for narrative designers and writers, and not having to constantly freelance. That would be a great goal to have for something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And discuss like stuff like intellectual property and copyright issues and stuff like that. At the moment, everything game related is considered software, which is not quite true, actually. But yeah, I don't know. I cannot, since I don't know exactly how the difference works between German and, for example, American or British unions, I cannot enlarge on that, but it does hurt our industry because I have heard people say at companies that, oh no, Betriebsrat is bad for the company, or unions are bad for the company, because they have that experience from the US, for example, and they take that experience and they don't know how things work in Germany because they work differently here, and unions are oftentimes really respectful and not. So I don't know if they're not as aggressive as in the US. And
I think in the States, there's just less law or mandated laws by the state towards workers and towards work givers or companies. And I think that's why the unions take a lot of that, work and effort to make this all legal and binding and fighting for rights. So I think that's why unions in America are so much more or stronger or in your face than they are in Germany.
It does make sense, yeah. I don't know. It's I find it sad that so little people, or so few people organize in unions, and it's kind of not cool anymore. And people just take for granted that they cannot do anything to better the situation, and that's just not true. But the means to do that are not considered appropriate or cool, and that's a bit sad.
And also a lot of fear, probably, right? Being afraid of being blacklisted and these kind of problems.
Yeah, true.
Sven, did you have any questions that you were, because I see you piecing out a little bit from the union talk and the Verdi talk. As an indie studio, you cannot afford your workers to rally up against you, of course.
No, from the worker POV, 100%. It's cool to have like this guardian shield of a union between you and your employer, somebody you can rely on, get expertise from, and like you're in a much better situation to negotiate anything if you have this huge body behind you than if you are alone in the field and it's just you and your employer. So generally, I'm super favorable for unions and unions existing. So that's just my stance.
The fun thing is that if you're an employee, for example, a narrative designer, or game designer, or a developer or something, you can actually do that. And my writers, or my authors, my book writers, they're usually self-employed, and they cannot even strike. Yeah, they don't have so many means to really put pressure on in this case, publishing houses, for example. And so we have to take different approaches to change stuff in the publishing industry, or in the book publishing industry. I have to define that better. So I think it's highly important that if you are an employee, you can use these means, and you have working rights that are underused in Germany, and so many people don't even know about that. That there are regulations how long you can work, for example, in a day, and how long your breaks need to be, and so on, and that there is not supposed to be so much supervision on your workplace, and
lots of these thoughts and rules. The thing is, Sven and me are both from the startup indie world, and as you probably know, lots of these rules get stretched in the startup world, just because everyone working for the startup is part of the founders, or like not even real employees in that sense, and everyone is just stretching themselves thin. But as soon as you reach this critical mass, or this point where you stabilize and where you become or get into a routine, then you should be like, every company should be pushing for that, right? But do we have an international standard for anything? No, we don't, because some studios do profit sharing, right, with the employees, which is amazing if you're a game designer or a narrative designer. Yeah. Some companies don't. There's just so many different approaches, and no like overhead European thing that is kind of trying to manage anything, which would be great.
Absolutely. But it's like globalization is very hard in that regard, because the circumstances and the working rights in different countries are so different. And if you don't even have like, I mean, even the holidays that are legal or have to be given out. So in Germany, you have to at least, I think, have 20 or 24 holidays in a year. And I think Americans are very envious of that because they usually have, I don't know, 10 days of holidays per year. And they don't even have like real sick days or a very limited amount of sick days, depending on where you live. And that's kind of harsh.
Especially when it comes to mental health.
Or something like maternal leave as well.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, paternal leave is also a thing.
Yeah.
Mental health days don't exist in the States either.
Yeah.
All of these, and healthcare, not every company even offers healthcare or dental. All of this is included in quotation marks in Germany or in the Europe, in Europe generally.
And I really don't see. So generally, CEOs of larger companies aim for an American approach to implement in their companies, and they find that the working rights of Germany are a hindrance and an issue. And I have a problem with that because I think that it's actually the exact opposite, because it is an ace up your sleeve to get employees from different countries into Germany because they know they have so many vacation days per year, and they know that, I don't know, medical is included, and they know that
insurance is included. All of
insurance
these
is included, and all that. So Germany is really, especially in the gaming industry, I know so many people from the US who opt to come here because of that, and who even take less money for their position to accept less money for their position to get that, to have that safety and security. And I think it's really a good thing to have that in Germany and not something that you have to work around.
Especially now that the AAA in Germany is also growing, right? Ubisoft is getting more and more, subsidies, and other AAA studios are also finding their way into Europe, into like Paris, into Sweden as well, and Norway. So there's
in the next phase of the funding as well.
Yeah.
If that will lead into anywhere, so we'll see.
Yeah, so a lot of companies are wising up to the fact, and I think that will trickle down towards North America as well, that they will have to, especially with all the COVID stuff going on, they will have to start to get more competitive in terms of offering nice services for their employees.
I think so, yeah, I hope so. Because creating a nice working environment is actually a plus and not a minus.
It costs money in the short run, but it's so much more profitable in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you said, more happy employees make better games. So
yeah, 100%.
Especially in the creative field, working creatively when you have like existential troubles or fears is really hard. I've experienced that in my novel writing career days, and also in a couple of different eras of my life. And if you have existential fear, creativity is the first thing that goes out of the window, to use a German metaphor. And it's really hard to be creative then. So I think like building a safe or a secure environment for your employees is really paying off in the long run. But you have to have that money first, of course.
Lena, I'm curious because Sven and me are juggling like a million projects, right? We're building a Half-Life Alyx mod. We're having the podcast. We're having the company, but you also school and writing thesis and all these kind of things. And seeing that you have so many things that are published, that are out there, that so you're able to get work done after doing work, right? You have a full day of teaching. You have a full day of. You're also a professor at the university, right?
No, I'm not a professor. I was a lecturer, and I was filling in a paternal leave situation for Eric Janot, who's returning into his position at the moment. So I'm on the market starting tomorrow, actually. The day after tomorrow.
So get in touch with Lena. We will drop her socials at the end of the episode. But yeah, to my question, how how do you manage to get work done after a full day?
Or get stuff over the finish line. Yeah. That's what I struggle with.
Oh God, yeah. It's panic actually. No, it's actually there's some truth in there. So of course, I usually say yes, and then I fit it in, and it's a mixture of deadline panic and passion. And then there comes some planning into this, of course. But I think passion drives you all the way, because if you really dig a project and fall in love with a story or a game, and you want to do it, it doesn't feel like work. And then there's obviously stuff that you need to do and have to do, and that's not so much fun. But that must be done too. So you fit that in too. And at some point, you have to have. So the fun thing in being self-employed, for example, is that you don't have to excuse yourself if you take a couple of weeks slower, for example, if you can do that between projects. And I find that you need that. And I'm usually I keep working for several months, and then I need, I don't know, a couple of weeks or 3 weeks to calm down again and to get a breather, and then I can slowly start the working amount up again and build up the level.
Do you have a favorite section of that overall writing process, like a favorite phase? Are you enjoying the world building the most, or are you actually like enjoying the writing, the dialogue, the stories the most, or is there something else you enjoy the most?
I'm plot strategist, so I like to plot and to build the puzzle that a story is, and I can very happily leave the writing to somebody else. I like writing, and if I write a novel, I enjoy it a bit more than in games writing, actually, because games writing is sometimes very fractured and you don't get into the flow so easily. And if you have a writing flow in novel writing, there's nothing better than that, actually. But no, I like the plotting part, and I'm one of these easily bored persons who like, if I have plotted the story, it's there in my mind. And writing the story is not that important anymore because the story is in my mind. So if there is a differentiation between a narrative designer and a games writer, I would rather do the narrative design and the plotting thing and leave the writing to somebody else.
I feel you, and I second your opinion 100%. It's always that I of course, I'm at the beginning of my career and not as accomplished, but it's just, it makes me so happy to plan and plot everything, right? I'm not an explorative writer. I'm definitely also a planner and a plotter, and it's just what makes me the happiest in the entire process.
The fun thing is, I usually say that I was an intuitive writer, and my memory got worse and worse, and I couldn't keep up the facts right in my head. Mm-hmm. And so I had to start plotting and planning. And also in the novel writing process, I realized that some stuff didn't work out, and it was double the work if you had to go back to change stuff instead of plotting it out first. But you have to, like, for me, you have to find the right mixture between the two, because if I plot too deeply, then I'm bored writing the novel, for example. Mm-hmm. And if I plan too little, then it gets that wobbly, unsteered, so you don't have that feeling that you know exactly where you're going, and you need to do some more plotting. So it has to be a good mixture between plotting and exploring a bit.
Sven and me use mainly for our plotting and planning Miro and these kind of softwares. Mm-hmm. What is your go-to when it comes to the entire process of narrative design softwares?
I have these old tools that still kind of work, called a pen and a sheet of paper. No, I love Miro. Miro is actually a revelation, especially in Corona times. I even use it for my RPG sessions to do social boards and whatnot. And but I actually in the planning phase, I don't know if you've experienced that, and I would be highly interested in knowing that if I plot something, I maybe this is more novels, because game writing is more craft than a novel, and I need to let things simmer in my brain for a bit, and I can pull it out of the brain too early. And then it doesn't make so much sense, and I have to put in double the work to have it make sense. If I get that unfinished stuff out of my brain too early, then it's just not done yet, and it is not ready to be pulled into the reel. I cannot explain it much better, and then I have to go back and take a step back and let it simmer for a bit. Do you have that? So making things real too early?
Sven, maybe?
For me personally, specifically in world building, I try to, regardless of how happy I am with the idea, it's kind of like a brainstorming session. I always try to note everything down in some form of like a card or something, and then stash it somewhere, like a big idea box basically. And then from time to time, I go back to that box, look over it. Maybe I even forgot some ideas, and then fall in love with them again, maybe. Or basically, I try to not let anything flow away once I've had this idea. So no matter how finished or how much baked this idea is already. So I try to conserve everything.
That does make sense, to note down the individual ideas, because like making things real and plotting it down is kind of putting them into a relationship, and that's too early for me oftentimes. And Sam, how do you feel about that?
I get that feeling a lot when handling story beats, like the especially where twists or turns or highlights are being talked about. And then because I always think, no, this is not good enough. This other idea that is still going to come is going to be way better, and I can't put this turning point down yet. But when it comes to, like, some ideas just hit you, right? When we were planning the world for our mod, and I don't want to spoiler or go into detail yet, especially since it's still heavily in the making. But some of these points on just general ideas that you want to have in the story and that define the story's like base or pillar or vision, those can go down very early, because I want to work towards them. But when it comes to specific twists and turns, highly indecisive.
And it's usually in the making sense part where that happens, right? Yeah,
because then you have to 100% fundamentally be able to explain why things are happening as they are happening. Maybe not in the actual final paper, but for your own world building, you have to know how and why this works.
Yeah.
And that immediately affects a good example would be a magic system. Like, the moment you put down how this magic system works, it defines your entire world building.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's where shit hits the fan.
Doesn't mean that it has to stay that way. You can always revise stuff. So it's not like
iteration.
You put it there and then
Oh, that's a thought. I obviously I do agree that you can change stuff all the time, but sometimes it's so huge that you cannot look past it. And then you have to cut it out again and look past it. And maybe sometimes it sneaks back in, but still it's sometimes it's just a roadblocker.
Did you also read Brandon Sanderson, like the Mistborn series?
I tried to, and I didn't. I stopped for some reason. I don't know why.
Very scientific systems, maybe. Maybe that's why, because he doesn't keep his novels or his books fantastical in nature, especially when it comes to magic. He's using a lot of scientific backdrop on how this magic system works, and it affects how, from second one in the novel, people are, I'm not going to spoil anything, but people are swallowing metals to, get their stuff going. And this just kind of fights against this, and this unknown that you want when you're dealing with a fantastical world. You want to not being able to know and to explain things. And I think this is the most important part, or the biggest part that I struggle with when going into fantastical worlds, that I want to keep the mystery, but when during the writing and design process, I take the mystery away from myself, which makes me in turn less interested in what I'm doing.
Yeah, right. Sometimes that happens.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
For me as a reader, I think the most difficult thing for getting into new fantasy worlds or new story setups as well, especially if it's science fiction or fantasy, then it's always, if I get the feeling that the world I'm experiencing is not grounded enough too much into reality and what I'm reading is too fantastical in a sense, then I kind of feel lost. Like if I can't recognize or see any patterns that I would like have in my mind for how our medieval ages would have been like if I, for example, reading something like George R. Martin or something, then I immediately know where to situate and where to put all the characters, and it feels like it's very much grounded in reality. And if it goes too much away from that, if there are too many new races or something that are not acting humanoid, then I always struggle with connecting with these creatures or characters because that can often get very quickly overwhelming. So for me, that if I'm writing stuff myself, I try to not overdo that in a sense.
And I think that's very wise because a reader or a player in this context, I think they feel the same way, that too much alienation is actually alienating people. So I mean, cliches are there for a reason, right? So you get into things very quickly and very easily because okay, I know how that works, and then you break it and you don't know how that works. But the first thing is to pull you in and to get the player in, and that's a wise thing. What I hate about games or novels is when they bombard you with newly found words in the first playing minutes or pages that you don't have an association for, you don't know what they're talking about, and that they're just trying to push me out of the story, actively pushing me out of the story. And that happens. I mean, entering a new story is a thing of, it has to do with trust, I think, like trusting the person that built the story or that wrote the story, that he or she is doing a good job and catches you and entertains you and maybe even gives you some deep emotions or feelings or thoughts about that. So so entering a new story is actually a huge step of trust to me. And I try to make that as interesting and as easy as possible for somebody who's entering that story. And I lost my point entirely why I'm telling you that to you, Sven.
Maybe I can add, because I think I know the point you were going for, and that is might be, I'm just guessing, relatability, right? You want there were stories out there. There was this failed sci-fi movie that came out in the last 2 or 3 years that had a beloved book, but I do not like
John Carter.
Yes, maybe. Something, one of the sci-fi movies with great book and background, and in the movie itself, it was just mumbo jumbo together, and you couldn't, 10,000 words that didn't make sense coming at you, 10,000 rules of the world that you couldn't make sense of, all at once, and then you didn't have a relation or relatability towards the world, towards the characters, and it never really picked up. But if you're able to, ground the viewer or the listener or the reader in your world, be it game or book, then people will, make an emotional connection much more easier.
Absolutely. So you can only, make your world so alien, because if you have striped horses, you will call it a zebra. If you call it something else, people don't know what you're talking about, basically. And of course, you can insert new races or new monsters, new aliens, new spaceships, but it's still a concept that we have in our mind in a way. And some people always think that they have to reinvent the wheel when writing a story, and that's just not true. Of course, you don't want to write, I don't know, the same basis of the story that you've already done or that everybody else is doing, though actually that's not true. If you want to write a bestseller, that's exactly the way you should be going. It's the truth. So no, bestsellers.
What do I need to do to write a bestseller?
No, people. It's of course that was a bit vicious of me, because best-selling novels and games, of course, have their value and they offer you something new, but not all of them. And I mean, romance novels, for example, still sell good with basically the same love triangle with different names and different settings on it.
Mhm.
So to sell something, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but usually it's us as writers or designers who want to find something new in the story that we tell, because again, we're easily bored and we don't want to repeat ourselves. And of course, the reader or the player absolutely values that, and they want. So they would be pissed too if they would read 3 of your novels or play 3 of your games and they would be exactly the same storyline on the basis of it.
Some people also want that. I mean, Sven is a Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
Shots fired.
Shots fired. I'm sorry. But yeah, I see what you mean. It's the same. I think that's the same criticism that people have of AAA games, right? That they are rehashing a formula. But for it, in order to be successful with a broad spectrum of people, for it to become a bestseller, it must be compatible with many different personality types. And the more personality types and different kinds of human beings you want to have in this target group, the broader and less specific, I guess, the game or genre has.
I think it's actually a very hard thing to write, I don't know, Assassin's Creed 8 or, I don't know, Witcher 4, because you have to absolutely work out what are the pillars of the experience that I'm offering players, and where do I need to stick to that formula, because that's what people want, because that's what the franchise is about, and where do I need to venture off the beaten paths to offer something new and to adjust to the technology, for example. If you compare Witcher 1 to Witcher 3, you hardly notice that you play the same game, because the fighting mechanics are so different and awkward in Witcher 1. It's really hard to play that.
Oh, yes.
And for example, let's go to Assassin's Creed. I loved the Ezio series of Assassin's Creed 2, 2A, 2B, 2C. I really loved those, and I would love to go back to the experience that they were offering me in that series. And I don't quite like the open game world so much. I mean, Origins and Odyssey are amazing games, and Valhalla will be an amazing game too. I will play them, but I think the experience to me of the Ezio series was much deeper, and it was more concise story and experience wise. And that's a decision that you need to make as a producer or a designer.
I think they moved away from a certain player fantasy. Like they changed what they want the player to experience or to feel when they play the game, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
In the original parts that you loved and that we loved as well, or I loved as well, and it's very much about the story and the mysteries that you are uncovering. But in the end, it's more of a open world power fantasy. Both are amazing in their own regards, but they achieve different results in the player.
Yeah, absolutely. And you gain one thing, so you gain player agency, obviously, in Origins and Odyssey, and you lose that density of the story, that immersion factor, in a way. For me, maybe other people feel differently about that. But it's really, I mean, they explicitly went for the agency part. So that was very much done on purpose. And they ventured off the story, like the embedded storyline a bit. And for me, that was a great part of the pulling me into the game, that density of the story and of the character and of the world.
Well, I think you're describing the eternal struggle of game designers versus narrative designers or writers in a studio, right? The narrative designers always push and want, and that's what we want as well, and that's what we are missing. We want the story density of the first Assassin's Creeds. We want to go really deep into that. We want cool moments, cinematic moments, all that kind of stuff, emotional impact. And then there's the game designers in the studio who want the gameplay to be extremely addicting.
The systemic depth and all the RPG systems,
all the systems, and go far away from narrative and then add the narrative later. And I think the perfect balance between the two is what we are all aiming for, but not always achievable.
I was just wanting to say they're both right, actually. That's the problem. Yeah. I think that why we're talking about world building. Sven mentioned how deep do you need to make a world. I think you don't have to have the perfect world designed into every detail that you have out there. I think that like world design is always about consistency on the one hand, like does it make sense to me? Invention, and that's kind of the inventing new stuff and changing, I don't know, the laws of physics or stuff like that, and completeness, like how complete is the world? So it's that triangle, and all of these 3 points, like consistency and invention and completeness, they influence each other. So if you want a complete world, you will lack in the invention part or in the consistency part, because you cannot be that deep and consistent sometimes. And if you take away from that, the other 2 factors again will change. And that is a complicated balance to keep, I think. Though I would argue that keeping the inventive side of things not as deep as you feel you have to do to surprise yourself. I think that the reader or the player are happy with a fraction of that sometimes.
And then set that into the overall fight that all game makers, game developers always have, which is what you already mentioned earlier, is the innovation versus, keeping it the same, keep the character of the franchise. It's very hard to not innovate too much, because then players will be disappointed that it's not the same anymore.
Yeah.
But also innovate too less, and players will be again disappointed and be like, hey, this is the same. This is essentially not a sequel. It's the same game with different content.
Yeah. And that answer is very hard to get. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we already breezed past the hour mark 10 minutes ago. But we did have a lot of little breaks in between.
Yeah.
But we breezed past the 1 hour mark. So if you have anything to pitch, anything to promote, then now would be the chance. Anything you want to say?
Okay, then I'm promoting my new Audible audiobook. So it's called Arkenhall. It's in German. It is an original, Audible original, so that it's so specifically written for the audio format. We did it in a writing team of 3 under a pen name, a pseudonym, which is called, I think, J.C. Falconer. And it's a high fantasy with a low fantasy content, actually. And it's about a girl that is basically possessed by a mystical raven that is bringing the pest, the plague into the world. And the raven is using her to spread the plague, and she's trying to figure out what to do with that and how to avenge the death of her family to the people that called that plague raven into the world. And I really love the story and the setup. It's, like I said, Arkenhall. It's due on I think the 15th of October, so it's a month, and we're in the process of writing the 2nd season at the moment.
Awesome.
Which is a lot of fun too. So if you're interested in audiobooks and high fantasy, then you might want to check it out.
Lots of time to get hyped for it. Arkenhall, right?
Yeah, Arkenhall.
And where can we find it again?
Audible.
All right, Arkenhall on Audible.
And where can people find you if they want to follow you somewhere?
Oh, okay. I'm basically everywhere, I think. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook under Lena Falkenhagen. I'm on Twitter under surprise at Lena Falkenhagen in one word. I'm also on Instagram under the same name. And I think that's it.
Awesome. We will put these in the description as always. And of course, thank you for being here. Thank you for being with us, taking your time out of your busy week and busy day to chat with us about games and narratives.
Yes.
And it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks a lot. Maybe to close things out, you can also follow the podcast at Idiots Industry on Twitter or at Industry Idiots on Instagram, or click on your favorite podcast player app into the episode description, and then you'll find all the links listed below.
So thank you, everyone, for making us part of your weekly routine. And as always, bye.
Bye.
Bye.